I had been able to see wandering souls for as long as I could remember. Sometimes they appeared beside hospital beds. Sometimes they followed grieving relatives through crowded streets. When the separation between body and consciousness was strong enough, I could hear them speak. My parents called it a curse. By the time they adopted Vanessa, they had already decided she was the daughter they deserved. Vanessa was charming, graceful, and ordinary. She never stared at people no one else could see. My parents dressed her in new clothes, paid for private schools, and praised her for everything. I received whatever remained. Years later, Vanessa became engaged to Julian Ashford, heir to one of Chicago's wealthiest families. Then, 3 days before the wedding, Julian's car was struck by a truck. He survived surgery, but he never opened his eyes. The doctor said recovery was possible, though no one could promise when. Vanessa lasted less than 24 hours. "I'm not wasting my youth beside a man who may never wake up," she snapped in the hospital lounge. "Do you expect me to feed him, clean him, and sleep beside machines for the rest of my life?" Mrs. Ashford stood across from her, pale with exhaustion. "The neurologist believes familiar voices and emotional support could help. Julian loved you. If you stayed—" "No." Vanessa removed her engagement ring and dropped it onto the table. "I would rather disappear than marry someone who cannot even say my name." That was when Julian's soul appeared behind her. He looked almost exactly as he had in photographs, except his skin was translucent and fury burned in his eyes. "So that's what her promises were worth," he said bitterly, though no one except me reacted. 6 years together, and she leaves before the bruises fade. Then he muttered, "The doctor said I could wake within a year if someone willingly stays with me. Fine. Whoever does it gets $150 million when I recover." My heart nearly stopped. Before I could reconsider, I raised my hand. "I'll marry him." Every face turned toward me. Vanessa stared for 1 second, then laughed. "You?" She pushed me toward Mrs. Ashford. "Take her. She's been a burden in our house her whole life. At least she knows how to cook and clean." My mother nodded eagerly. "Elena has always been suited to caregiving." My father added, "She looked after my grandparents for years. She won't complain." Julian's soul floated closer to Vanessa, throwing a furious punch that passed through her shoulder. "You told me Elena bullied you. You said she was cruel and jealous, but she's the one you treated like a servant?" I lowered my eyes so no one would notice I was watching him. Mrs. Ashford approached me cautiously. "Elena, do you understand what you are offering? Julian cannot sign a marriage license now. There may be no wedding for months." "I understand. If you remain with him and care for him until he wakes, I will recognize you as his intended wife." "I can do that." Julian's soul studied me with suspicion. I pretended not to see him, but inside I repeated the promise he had made. $150 million. For the first time in my life, being discarded by my family might become my escape. Half an hour later, I entered Julian's private hospital room. He looked nothing like the confident man from the engagement photographs. His face was pale, his body thinner beneath the blankets, and wires connected him to machines that measured every fragile sign of life. His soul stood beside the window. "So this is the woman volunteering to marry a stranger for money," he said, watching me carefully. "At least she's honest enough not to pretend it's love." Mrs. Ashford wiped her eyes. "The surgery repaired most of the damage, but his brain still needs time. The doctors believe he could wake in 8 months, or it could take several years." She looked towards the hallway before lowering her voice. "The public cannot know how serious his condition is. Julian controls several companies. If investors believe he may never recover, the damage could be enormous." I understood immediately. Vanessa had not only abandoned a fiancé, she had abandoned the future head of the Ashford family at the exact moment they needed stability. Mrs. Ashford continued, "We can hire nurses for every medical task. What Julian needs is someone who will stay near him, speak to him, and keep his mind connected to the world." Julian's soul folded his arms. "I don't need romantic speeches. Read me business reports. Tell me what's happening at the company. Play something other than those terrible hospital television programs." I pretended not to hear him. "I can read to him every morning," I said. "I'll keep a record of major news, play music, and describe what's happening outside." Mrs. Ashford blinked. "You've thought about this already?" I also want to use familiar scents and sounds. Coffee, fresh flowers, different foods. If his senses still respond, repetition may help. Julian's suspicious expression softened slightly. At least she has a plan. I can help the nurses turn him, wash his hair, shave him, and exercise his hands, I added. I cared for 2 bedridden relatives when I was younger. Mrs. Ashford reached for my hand. You don't need to do everything. I know, but I want him to recognize my voice when he wakes. That evening, my parents signed every document without reading it carefully. They were far too eager to remove me from their house. My mother packed 1 suitcase filled mostly with old clothes and handed it to the Ashford driver. Try not to embarrass us, she said. Vanessa leaned against the doorway, smiling. A ghost girl and a sleeping corpse. You finally found someone desperate enough to keep you. Julian's soul floated behind her, furious. She called you a ghost girl? I kept my face expressionless. Vanessa continued. Don't start imagining you'll become Mrs. Ashford. If he wakes up, he'll remember who he actually loves. Julian laughed coldly. I'll remember exactly who abandoned me. As the car pulled away, I looked back only once. My parents were already closing the door. The next morning, Mrs. Ashford arrived at the hospital and found me shaving Julian's face. A documentary about international markets played on the television. A tablet rested on my lap, displaying overnight financial reports. Beside his pillow stood a bowl of orange peel, cinnamon, and dark coffee beans to cover the disinfectant smell. I had also moved a narrow folding bed into the corner. Mrs. Ashford stopped in the doorway. You stayed here all night? I wanted him to hear someone nearby. You could sleep at our house. I smiled. As long as I don't have to return to my parents' home, this room is more than enough. Julian's soul looked at me for a long moment. Then he sat beside his own motionless body. Vanessa would never have lasted 1 night here, he murmured. Maybe this disaster brought me the only reliable person in that family. I continued reading the morning market summary aloud. Inside, I allowed myself one small smile. It seemed I had passed his first test. Over the next several days, I learned Julian's habits by listening to the soul he assumed no one could hear. He remained close to his body most of the time. Whenever he drifted too far down the corridor, his outline weakened, so he quickly returned to the ward. Mostly, he followed me around and complained. Why does she keep playing piano music? I prefer old jazz. The following morning, a trumpet recording played softly beside his bed. Julian's soul stared at the speaker. Coincidence? Later, while I rubbed lotion into his hands, he muttered, And why does she keep bringing citrus? I hate oranges. Mangoes would be better. The next day, I placed a ripe mango beside his pillow. His soul narrowed his eyes at me. Did my mother tell her? I cut the fruit into small pieces and spoke to his unconscious body. Julian, today's mystery fruit has 1 large seed. I'll let you guess what it is. I gently moved his fingers, folding them into different numbers. His soul looked offended. Stop treating me like a puppet. No one has ever dared move my hands like that. By the end of the week, he had stopped protesting. Sometimes, when I made his fingers point dramatically at the television or wave at the nurses, he rolled his eyes while secretly smiling. One afternoon, I opened a container of mango pudding. The sweet scent filled the room. Julian's soul leaned over it with obvious longing. I need to wake up soon. Watching someone else eat this is torture. At that exact moment, the heart monitor changed rhythm. Only slightly, but I noticed. So did the nurse. She checked the screen, adjusted one of the sensors, and smiled. His responses are becoming more active. After she left, I ate a spoonful of pudding. You know, I told Julian, this is the first dessert anyone has bought specifically for me. His soul stopped staring at the food. I continued because talking to him had become easier than talking to any living person. At home, Vanessa always chose what we ate. If there was anything good, it went to her first. I usually got whatever was bruised, stale, or left behind. I described how I had cared for my grandparents, cooked every meal, washed everyone's clothes, and still been called useless. Your mother gave me $50,000 for personal expenses, I said. I nearly returned it because I thought there had been a mistake. Julian's expression changed. The sarcasm disappeared. Your family treated you like that? I looked toward his sleeping face. Being here is easier. At my parents' house, I cared for 4 people. Here, I only care for you. His soul moved closer. For once, he said nothing. That evening, I told him more. How Vanessa blamed broken objects on me, how my parents never believed my explanations, how seeing souls had frightened them enough to treat me like something shameful. I did not intend to confess so much, but Julian could not interrupt, judge me, or repeat my words to anyone. At least, I believed he could not. When I finally stopped speaking, his eyes were red. They kept their adopted daughter comfortable by sacrificing their own child? His voice had become cold. When I wake up, I'm going to make sure they understand exactly what they threw away. I adjusted his blanket. Punishment was not what I wanted. Freedom was enough. And, of course, the $150 million he had promised. From that day forward, something between us changed. I still pretended not to see him, but I began answering his wishes before he spoke them twice. He stayed near me constantly, watching as I read reports, changed the flowers, and helped the nurses exercise his limbs. After 4 months, while I was moving his fingers through their usual routine, one finger pressed back against mine. This time, I had not moved it. I stared at his hand. Then it happened again. Julian's finger moved on its own. I immediately called Mrs. Ashford. By that evening, specialists had filled the ward, and by the next morning, Vanessa had returned. Vanessa entered the ward without knocking. She wore sunglasses despite the cloudy morning and carried herself like someone arriving to inspect property she still believed belonged to her. Her gaze moved from Julian's hand to the specialist gathered around the bed. "So it's true," she said. "He's starting to respond." I stood beside the monitor, saying nothing. Vanessa crossed the room, grabbed my wrist, and pulled me into the hallway. "What exactly have you been doing in there?" "Taking care of him." She slapped me. The sound echoed against the white walls. "You really think 4 months beside a hospital bed makes you an Ashford?" I touched my cheek. Julian's soul shot through the wall before I could answer. His expression was furious. "She hit you?" Vanessa leaned closer. "When Julian wakes up, you're leaving. That decision won't be yours." She laughed. "He loved me before the accident. Do you honestly think he'll choose some strange girl he barely knows?" Julian's soul folded his arms. "I know her better than I ever knew you." Vanessa continued. "I'll tell him I was the one who stayed. I'll say you were only a hired caregiver." A cold realization settled over me. Julian's soul remembered everything. But would his waking mind remember the soul? As if hearing my thoughts, Julian suddenly looked uncertain. What if I forget? His anger disappeared. What if my consciousness returns without these memories? What if I wake up believing whatever she tells me? For the first time since I met him, he looked afraid. Vanessa pointed a finger toward my face. "You'll keep quiet. My family raised you, fed you, and gave you a home. You owe us." I almost laughed. "You mean I worked for all of you without being paid?" Her expression sharpened. "Careful, Elena." Then she turned and walked into the ward as though she had every right to be there. Julian's soul floated beside me. "My mother knows the truth," he said quickly. "She'll tell me." I wanted to believe him, but that afternoon, Vanessa met privately with Mrs. Ashford. I did not hear the beginning of their conversation. I only heard Vanessa's voice when I passed the half-open office door. "Julian chose me before the accident. If he wakes up confused, seeing me will help him recover." Mrs. Ashford answered quietly. "Elena has been here every day, and she can be compensated." There was a pause. Vanessa lowered her voice. "Think about the company. The public already knows Julian and I were engaged. If he suddenly marries my sister, people will ask questions." Mrs. Ashford said nothing. That silence frightened me more than agreement would have. Later, she found me in the ward. "Elena, may I speak with you?" I followed her into the family lounge. She looked exhausted. "When Julian wakes, he may not remember these months." "I know." Vanessa believes returning to the original engagement would help preserve stability. I waited. Mrs. Ashford avoided my eyes.
You would receive generous compensation, more than enough to begin a new life. Julian's soul hovered behind her, horrified. Mother, what are you doing? If Julian remembers Vanessa as the woman he loves, Mrs. Ashford continued, that may be kinder not to confuse him. And the person who actually stayed? Her face tightened. No one would forget what you did. They simply wouldn't say it publicly. She did not answer. The old instinct rose inside me. The instinct to nod, accept, and disappear before anyone became angry. So I nodded. If that is what you decide. Julian's soul spun toward me. Elena, fight for yourself.
But I had spent my entire life learning that people with money, family, and influence always won. What did I have besides 4 months of invisible conversations? Vanessa wasted no time. The next morning, headlines appeared online. Devoted fiancé waits for Ashford heir to wake. She gave interviews describing nights she had supposedly spent beside Julian's bed. I never lost faith, she told the cameras. Love means staying even when the person you love cannot respond. I watched the video silently. Julian's soul paced furiously across the ward. She wasn't here for a single night. Then he stopped beside his body. Fine, I'll remember. His voice hardened. I don't care what it takes. When I open my eyes, I will remember who stayed and who ran. I looked at his motionless face. For both our sakes, I prayed he was right. 2 more months passed. Julian's medical responses became stronger almost every day. His eyes moved beneath closed lids. His breathing changed when I spoke. Sometimes, when I read the morning financial report, his fingers tightened slightly against the blanket. The doctors said he could wake at any time. Julian's soul became restless. He followed me everywhere, rarely leaving the room even when the weather was bright outside. What if the memories disappear the moment I return to my body? He asked for the 100th time. I don't know. You can't say something more encouraging? I could lie. He glared at me. You've become much less obedient. You complained when I was too obedient. That doesn't mean you should use my own words against me. Despite his irritation, fear remained beneath every joke. On the morning everything changed, I woke on the folding bed and immediately knew something was wrong. The room felt empty. Julian's soul was gone. I rushed to his bedside. His pulse was faster. His eyelids trembled, and the heart monitor displayed a rhythm unlike anything I had seen before. I called the nurses, Mrs. Ashford, and the specialist team. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later with 3 reporters and a photographer. She had prepared for this moment. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup soft and tearful, and she wore the engagement ring she had abandoned months earlier. Mrs. Ashford looked uncomfortable when she saw the cameras. Vanessa, this is a medical procedure. The public has supported us through everything, Vanessa replied. They deserve to witness the miracle. I stood near the door with my small travel bag. If Julian remembered nothing, there would be no reason for me to remain. The doctors adjusted his medication and tested his responses. Then the monitor beeped sharply. Julian inhaled. His eyelids opened. For several seconds, he stared at the ceiling without recognition. Everyone in the room held their breath. His fingers moved against the sheet. Vanessa pushed past the doctors and grabbed his hand. Julian, you're awake. His eyes shifted toward her. She began crying immediately. It's me, Vanessa. I stayed with you every day. I never left this hospital. I knew our love would bring you back. My chest became hollow. I lowered my head and reached for the handle of my bag. Then Julian spoke. His voice was weak, barely more than air. You stayed? Vanessa nodded rapidly. Every morning and every night. He watched her for a long moment. What did you read to me? Her smile flickered. What? Every morning, he repeated. What did you read? She glanced toward Mrs. Ashford. Poetry, prayers, comforting things. Julian's eyes hardened. No. The room became completely silent. He slowly turned his head. His neck was weak and the movement clearly hurt, but he continued until his gaze found me near the door. Elena. My hand tightened around the bag. Don't leave. I could barely move.
Vanessa released his fingers. Julian, you're confused. The medication... She read market reports, opening prices, company news, international forecasts. His eyes remained on me. She played jazz because I hated the piano recordings. Vanessa took one step backward. The cameras recorded everything.
Julian continued, each sentence stronger than the last. What fruit did she bring after I complained about oranges? Vanessa said nothing. What dessert did she eat beside my bed? Silence. What did she tell me about her family? Vanessa's face lost all color. Julian looked directly at the reporters she had invited. Mangoes, he said. Mango pudding. She told me it was the first dessert anyone had ever bought specifically for her. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I heard you, Julian said to me. His voice broke slightly. All 6 months, every report, every story, every time you thought you were speaking to someone who could never answer. Vanessa turned toward the doctors. He has a brain injury. These memories could be false. My memory is clear. Julian looked at her with open disgust. I also remember hearing you slap Elena outside this room. One reporter lifted his camera higher. Vanessa stared at Julian, then at me. For the first time in our lives, she had no prepared answer, and everyone was watching. Vanessa recovered first. She always did. Her expression shifted from shock to wounded innocence so quickly that anyone who did not know her might have believed she was the victim. Elena manipulated you, she said. She had access to you while you were helpless. She could have repeated those details until your brain accepted them as memories. Julian's eyes narrowed. Then answer one question. Vanessa swallowed. What did Elena sing when she thought I was asleep? Her lips parted. Nothing came out. What did she say the first time she brought mango pudding? Still nothing. Tell me one specific thing from the past 6 months that proves you spent a single hour in this room. The silence was devastating. Not dramatic silence, real silence. The machines continued beeping. Someone's camera shutter clicked. A cart rolled past in the corridor. Vanessa had invited witnesses to her triumph. Now every lens recorded her failure. Mrs. Ashford stood near the window, looking at Julian with a shame I had never seen on her face before. He turned toward her. Were you going to let Vanessa take Elena's place? Julian, were you? Mrs. Ashford lowered her eyes. I thought you still loved Vanessa. I believed returning to the engagement would make your recovery easier. You thought it would make the company's story cleaner. Her face tightened. I was trying to protect you. By paying Elena to disappear? Mrs. Ashford slowly crossed the room and sat beside his bed. Tears appeared before she could hide them. Elena, I'm sorry. She reached for my hand. My first instinct was to accept immediately. That was what I had always done. I softened other people's guilt before they had to feel it fully. But I thought about the interviews, the false headlines, and the conversation in which she had calmly offered money in exchange for my silence. I stepped back. Say it again after some time has passed, I replied. I may be able to hear it better then. Mrs. Ashford withdrew her hand. She nodded once. I understand. My parents arrived less than an hour later. News about Julian's awakening had spread quickly, and my family had never missed an opportunity to attach themselves to wealth. My mother entered first, pressing both hands to her chest. Elena, sweetheart, we were so worried. My father smiled toward the reporters. We always knew our daughter's devotion would help Mr. Ashford recover. Julian looked at them. Who are you? My father's smile faltered. We're Elena's parents. We raised her to be patient and hardworking, my mother added quickly. Julian's expression went cold. She told me about the spoiled food. Neither of them moved. She said anything fresh went to Vanessa. Elena ate bruised fruit and leftovers after serving everyone else. My father glanced at me. There may have been some misunderstandings. She spoke about it as if it were normal. That was the worst part. She did not even realize how badly you treated her. My mother attempted a laugh.
Elena was always sensitive. She sometimes exaggerated because of her unusual condition. I felt something inside me become perfectly still. For years, they had used my ability as proof that I was unstable. Now they were trying to do it again.
You raised Vanessa as your daughter, I said. You raised me as unpaid help. My mother's face hardened. Elena, this is neither the time nor place. It is exactly the time. My father stepped closer. We are still your family. No, you are Vanessa's family. My voice remained quiet. If you need money, support, or care when you grow older, ask the daughter you chose. My mother inhaled sharply. I expected guilt to follow. Instead, I felt relief. I had spent my entire life trying to earn love from two people who had already decided I was undeserving. Now I was done. They looked toward Mrs. Ashford, perhaps expecting her to intervene. She did not. My parents left without another word. Vanessa had remained near the door, watching everything. Then she made one final mistake. She turned toward the reporters. Julian's judgment is clearly compromised. Elena has isolated him for months and created an emotional dependency. Julian closed his eyes briefly. When he reopened them, his voice was tired but firm. My legal team recovered your messages 3 days after the accident. Vanessa froze. The ones where you called me useless? He continued. The ones where you joked that marrying a disabled man would ruin your life? The cameras turned toward her. I plan to handle this privately, Julian said. But you brought the media into this room. His gaze settled on her. Whatever happens next is your responsibility. Vanessa looked at me with the same expression she had used since childhood, the look that demanded I become smaller so she could remain important. This time, I held her gaze. She was the one who looked away first. Vanessa left the hospital without another word. Her heels struck the corridor floor in sharp, uneven clicks, until the sound finally disappeared. The story published the following morning was not the one she had planned. She had expected photographs of herself holding Julian's hand beneath headlines about loyalty and true love. Instead, every major outlet reported the same humiliating truth. Ashford heir exposes former fiancé's lie moments after waking. Clips from the hospital spread everywhere. Millions of people watched Julian ask questions Vanessa could not answer. Her old messages were leaked later that afternoon, including one where she described him as a lifetime burden with a famous surname. The public turned against her almost instantly. I read the coverage from the chair beside Julian's bed while he slept. Waking had exhausted him. He remained conscious for only short periods, and even speaking required effort. That evening, his eyes opened. He watched me scrolling through an article before saying, "You knew what I wanted." I looked up. The jazz, the mangoes, even the business channel. His voice was still rough, but his attention was sharp. "You always brought something the day after I thought about it." I placed the tablet aside. "You were not imagining that." Julian studied my face. "What does that mean?" There was no easy way to explain it. "I can see souls." He blinked once. I continued before I lost courage. "I have seen them since childhood. Usually they belong to people who are dying or whose consciousness has separated from their bodies." "You saw mine?" "Yes. For 6 months. Nearly every day." His expression shifted from disbelief to realization. "That's why you knew I hated oranges. You complained constantly." "I did not complain constantly. You complained about the music, the room temperature, the television, your hair, the nurse's shoes, and the way I moved your fingers." A weak smile appeared. "I had been trapped outside my body. I had limited entertainment. You also promised me $150 million. His eyes widened slightly. "You heard that too? It was the reason I volunteered." For 1 second, neither of us spoke. Then Julian began laughing. The sound was faint and painful, but real. "I thought you were unbelievably selfless. I was trying to escape my family and become rich." That is somehow more reassuring. He lifted his hand from the blanket with visible effort. His fingers trembled as he reached toward me. So I was never alone. I looked at his hand. "No." "You heard everything I said?" "Unfortunately." "Even when I said you had beautiful eyes?" I felt heat rise into my face.
You said many things while believing no one could hear you. Julian smiled again. Then his expression became serious. I will transfer the money. You just woke up, that can wait. I made a promise. It was an angry promise made by a floating soul. It still counts. He managed to curl his fingers around mine. His grip was weak, but the intention behind it was not. It is not payment for caring for me, he said. It is the first promise I made to you. And what is the second? Julian looked directly into my eyes. That you will never return to the people who treated you like you were disposable. Something tightened in my throat. You cannot make that decision for me. No, but I can make sure you never have to return because you have nowhere else to go. For once, I did not argue.
The first time Julian attempted to sit upright, his entire body shook. 2 therapists supported his shoulders while I stood beside the bed, pretending not to notice how frightened he was. He lasted 11 seconds. Then he collapsed against the pillows, furious with himself. I used to run 5 miles before breakfast. And now you sat up for 11 seconds? That is not impressive. It is 11 seconds more than yesterday. He looked toward me. You are irritatingly optimistic. I learned it from listening to a man spend 6 months promising revenge while unable to move a finger. His mouth twitched. The following day, he lasted 19 seconds. A week later, he stood with assistance. Progress came slowly, accompanied by exhaustion, frustration, and days when nothing improved at all. On those days, I read financial reports beside him, just as I had before. Only now, Julian interrupted constantly, and hearing him answer was worth every complaint. 3 weeks into rehabilitation, Julian asked for mango pudding again. I brought 2 containers. He ate half of one while sitting upright without support, then insisted I take a photograph. Send it to my assistant, he said. With what caption? He considered it seriously. Proof that I'm alive and still capable of making excellent decisions. You chose Vanessa. His spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. That was unnecessary. It was accurate. He looked offended for several seconds, then laughed. The sound was stronger now. One of the therapists passing the doorway smiled when she heard it. Julian's recovery improved gradually. First, he learned to stand between parallel bars. Then, he crossed the hospital corridor with a therapist on one side and me on the other. There were setbacks. Some mornings, his legs refused to cooperate. Other days, headaches forced him back into bed before lunch. He hated weakness. I hated watching him blame himself for it. You were unconscious for 6 months, I reminded him after one particularly difficult session. Your body is not betraying you, it is rebuilding. It feels like betrayal. Then stop treating it like an enemy. He glanced at me. You are very bold now that I can answer. I was bold before. You simply could not argue back. By the time he transferred to the Ashford family home for outpatient therapy, he could walk several steps with a cane. Mrs. Ashford prepared an entire ground floor suite for him. She also prepared a room for me. She did not ask for forgiveness again. Instead, she began doing smaller things. She corrected every public statement that credited Vanessa. She placed my name on Julian's medical records as his primary companion. She hired a lawyer to ensure the money Julian promised became legally mine. Most importantly, she stopped making decisions for me. One evening, she found me reading in the garden. "Would you prefer to continue living here after Julian recovers?" she asked. "Or would you like your own apartment?" I closed the book. "You are asking what I want?" I should have asked much sooner. I considered her answer. "My own apartment, eventually." She nodded. "Then we'll find one you choose." It was not forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something that might one day become it. Vanessa returned 2 months after Julian woke. She arrived at the Ashford estate wearing a cream suit and the expression of someone who had rehearsed every sentence. Mrs. Ashford received her in the formal sitting room. Julian sat beside me on the sofa, his cane resting against his knee. Vanessa looked directly at me. "We grew up as sisters," she said. "Whatever happened, families should forgive." "We did not grow up as sisters." Her expression tightened. "You know what I mean. I grew up serving you."
That is different. She turned to Julian. You loved me once. I loved the person you pretended to be. The accident changed you. No, he replied. It removed my excuses. Vanessa inhaled sharply. I panicked. Anyone could have panicked. You canceled our marriage before the doctors finished explaining my condition. I was scared. You were embarrassed. She looked toward Mrs. Ashford, hoping for support. Mrs. Ashford's voice remained calm. You have no place in Julian's recovery or in this family's future. Vanessa stared at her. So Elena replaces me and everyone pretends she was always better? No one needs to pretend, Julian said. Vanessa's eyes filled with familiar tears. This time, no one rushed to comfort her. She stood. Before leaving, she looked at me with the same hatred she had carried since childhood. You think you won.
I shook my head. This was never a competition to me. That answer hurt her more than cruelty would have. She left without saying goodbye. I watched through the window as she crossed the driveway alone. For most of my life, Vanessa had seemed enormous because my parents placed her above everything else. Without their favoritism, Julian's wealth, or the attention of cameras, she looked unexpectedly ordinary. She was not destroy. She would build another life, probably without understanding what she had done. But she would never enter mine again. That was enough. Julian reached for my hand. Are you all right? Yes. You are sure? I looked at the closed front door. For the first time, I am. And I meant it. 8 months after Julian opened his eyes, we announced our engagement. By then, he could walk without assistance for short distances. He still used a cane when he was tired, although he complained about it constantly. The cane makes me look 80. It makes you look alive. That is a very low standard. It is still an improvement over unconscious. He pretended to be offended, but I saw the smile he tried to hide. The announcement was held in the glass conservatory behind the Ashford estate. Mrs. Ashford invited business partners, family friends, and several people from the hospital who had helped during Julian's recovery. I wore a dark blue dress I had chosen myself. No one approved at first. No one told me whether the color suited me. I looked in the mirror and decided that I liked the woman looking back. My parents appeared just before dinner. They had not been invited. My mother carried white roses, and my father wore the expensive suit he saved for occasions involving important people. From across the room, I watched them speak to a member of staff. My mother's eyes found me immediately. She smiled as though the last 8 months had never happened. Elena, Julian said quietly. He stood beside me, one hand resting on his cane. Do you want to speak to them? For several seconds, I watched the people who had raised me. They looked hopeful now, not because they missed me, because they had seen the articles, the engagement photographs, and the financial reports confirming that Julian had transferred the money he promised. They were not looking at their daughter. They were looking at access. No, I said. Julian nodded once. He did not ask whether I was certain. He simply turned with me toward the guests waiting nearby. Mrs. Ashford crossed the room a few minutes later and approached my parents. I could not hear what she said. My mother's smile disappeared first. Then my father tried to argue. Mrs. Ashford remained perfectly calm. 5 minutes later, they left the conservatory with the flowers still in my mother's hands. I did not ask where they went. Julian and I became engaged officially that evening. There was no dramatic proposal in front of the guests. He had already asked me privately 2 weeks earlier, while we were sitting in the hospital garden, where he completed his final rehabilitation assessment. He held out a ring and said, I spent 6 months talking to you before I knew you could hear me. That sounds like a warning, not a proposal. I'm serious. So am I. He looked almost nervous. I do not want to marry you because you cared for me. I do not want gratitude to become a cage for either of us. I stayed quiet. I want to marry you because you are the only person who ever knew every ugly thought I had and stayed anyway. You were unconscious. Leaving would have looked terrible. Elena. I smiled. He continued, you made me want to wake up. Then, after I did,
You made me want to become someone worthy of the life I returned to. That was when he opened the ring box. I cannot promise that I will never make mistakes. You definitely will. I was trying to be romantic. I am listening. He exhaled. I can promise that I will never ask you to become smaller so I can feel larger. For a moment, I could not speak. That promise mattered more than the ring, the money, or the Ashford name. Yes, I said. His shoulders relaxed. Was that a real yes? No, I regularly accept marriage proposals as a joke. He laughed and slid the ring onto my finger. Now, in the conservatory, Julian lifted a glass while the guests quieted.
A year ago, I believed I had lost everything, he said. I could not move, speak, or control what happened around me. His eyes found mine. But someone sat beside me every day and reminded me that the world was still waiting. The room blurred slightly. She believed I could return before I believed it myself. I glanced toward Mrs. Ashford. She was crying openly. This time, there was no shame in her expression, only gratitude. Julian held out his hand. I took it. The applause began around us, but I barely heard it. For most of my life, I had been taught to accept leftovers and call them enough. Now I stood beside a man who had heard every truth I had hidden, and instead of using those truths against me, he had built a place where I no longer needed to hide. We chose a garden for the wedding. Julian originally wanted a celebration large enough to fill every society page in Chicago. The Ashfords had always marked important moments with chandeliers, orchestras, and guest lists measured in hundreds. I wanted something smaller. I spent most of my life disappearing inside other people's events, I told him. For once, I want to recognize everyone in the room. We compromised. 100 guests, an old estate outside Lake Geneva, and a ceremony beneath white flowering trees. Julian had been walking without his cane for nearly a month, but I asked him to bring it. He stared at me when I explained why. You want the cane in our wedding photographs? Yes. Most brides ask photographers to hide imperfections. It is not an imperfection. I touched the polished handle. It is proof of what we survived. I don't want our story cleaned until it looks easier than it was. His expression softened. Then I'll carry it. On the morning of the wedding, Mrs. Ashford came into my room while I was fastening an earring. She stood behind me in the mirror, holding a small velvet box. This belonged to Julian's grandmother. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet set with blue stones. I would like you to wear it, she said, but only if you want to. Months earlier, she would have placed it on my wrist before asking. The difference mattered. I held out my hand. I'd like that. Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the clasp. Elena, I know an apology cannot undo what I almost allowed. I met her eyes in the mirror. No? She nodded. But I hope my actions since then have shown that I understand. They have. It was not complete forgiveness. Perhaps forgiveness was not one moment, but a collection of choices repeated until trust stopped feeling dangerous. Mrs. Ashford pressed her lips together, trying not to cry. You brought my son back. He came back himself. He came back because you gave him somewhere to return. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. One of the coordinators entered, looking uncomfortable. There are two people at the front gate claiming to be the bride's parents. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. My mother wore pale pink and carried a wrapped gift. My father had prepared a speech. They had arrived expecting the public reconciliation they believed would make them look generous. I watched them through an upstairs window. Julian entered behind me. You don't have to see them. I know. They won't enter unless you say so. Below us, my mother argued with security. My father gestured toward the estate as though my childhood entitled him to everything inside it. For years, I had imagined them finally regretting how they treated me. Now that the moment had arrived, it felt smaller than I expected. They didn't come because they love me, I said. No, they came because the daughter they discarded became valuable. Julian stood quietly beside me.
What do you want? I looked away from the window. I want to get married. He smiled. That can be arranged. Mrs. Ashford went to the gate herself. I never learned exactly what she told them. I only saw my mother's face collapse and my father lower his eyes before they returned to their car. No dramatic confrontation, no final speech. They simply left the same way they had sent me away years earlier, with a door closing between us. When the music began, I stood at the garden entrance. Julian waited beneath the trees with his cane beside him. He looked stronger than the man in the hospital bed, but his eyes held the same warmth I had first seen in the soul who followed me around complaining about oranges. I walked toward him. When I reached the altar, he took my hand. His grip was firm now. He leaned closer and whispered, "How many pieces should a perfect mango have?" I fought a laugh. "That depends on who cuts it." Wrong. What is the correct answer? As many as you're willing to share with me. You practiced that. For 3 days. It shows. He grinned. The officiant cleared his throat, pretending not to have heard us. Around us, late afternoon sunlight passed through the branches. Mrs. Ashford cried in the front row. The nurses and therapists who had helped Julian recover smiled beside her. For once, every person present had come because they belonged there. And when Julian promised to choose me in every version of the life ahead, I believed him. Not because he was wealthy, not because he had once promised me millions while floating outside his body. I believed him because he had already seen the parts of me my family called strange, difficult, and unwanted, and he had never once asked me to hide them. The morning after the wedding, several photographs appeared online. One showed Julian standing beneath the flowering trees with his cane in one hand and mine in the other. Another captured us laughing during the ceremony after his ridiculous mango question. Vanessa saw them before breakfast. I knew because she posted a comment beneath one of the articles, deleted it, then posted another and deleted that too. For once, she understood that anything she said would only remind people of the hospital room she had filled with cameras. The world already knew the truth. There was nothing left for her to steal. My parents remained silent. They sent one letter to the Ashford estate, though it was addressed to Julian rather than me. My father explained that families sometimes made mistakes and suggested that financial success should be shared with the people who had made Elena who she was. Julian read the first paragraph, raised one eyebrow, and handed it to me. "What would you like me to do with this?" I tore it in half. Then I tore it again. "Recycle it." He smiled. "A responsible choice." We ate mango pudding for breakfast in the garden. Julian insisted it was a wedding tradition. "It became a tradition approximately 30 seconds ago," I said. "All traditions begin somewhere. And why does ours involve dessert before 9 in the morning?" "Because I spent 6 months unable to eat anything." It was difficult to argue with that. Married life was quieter than the stories written about us. There were no daily scandals, dramatic parties, or constant reminders that Julian was wealthy. Most mornings, he complained about physical therapy while I read market reports at the kitchen table. The habit never disappeared, only now he interrupted. "That analyst is wrong. You said that yesterday. He was wrong yesterday, too. You were much easier to read to when you were unconscious. You manipulated my fingers and fed yourself pudding in front of me. You could not object. I objected constantly. No one could hear you. You could." I looked over the newspaper. "That was your mistake." He laughed, and the sound still made something warm unfold inside me. Months later, Julian returned to the office. His first day lasted only 4 hours. When he came home, he tried to pretend he was not exhausted. I found him asleep on the sofa with his laptop still open. For a moment, fear took me back to the hospital. The pale face, the machines, the soul standing beside a body that would not respond. Then Julian opened one eye. "You're staring." "I was checking whether your soul had escaped again. It knows better now." "Why?" "Because my wife would charge it rent." I threw a cushion at him. He caught it badly and nearly fell from the sofa, which made both of us laugh until his side hurt. That evening, we sat by the windows as rain moved across Chicago. Julian took my hand. "Do you ever regret volunteering?" I considered the question. "I volunteered because I heard you promise money." "I remember." I did not expect you to wake up remembering me. Would you have left if I had forgotten? Yes.
The answer seemed to surprise him. I would have taken whatever compensation your mother offered and built a life somewhere else. You would not have fought for me? I had already spent my whole life fighting to be chosen. I would not have done it again. Julian nodded slowly. I'm glad I remembered. So am I. He lifted my hand and pressed his lips against my fingers. I thought you brought me back. No, I reminded you that there was something worth returning to. His eyes remained on mine. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't, but I understood what he meant. For 6 months, I had spoken into a room believing no one living could answer me. And all that time, someone had been listening. My family taught me that being different made me a burden. Vanessa taught me that kindness could be exploited. But Julian taught me something neither of them understood. Being seen completely was not the same as being judged. Sometimes it was the beginning of being loved. A year after the wedding, I returned to the hospital where everything had begun. Not as a caregiver, not as the unwanted daughter my family had sent away. The rehabilitation department invited Julian to speak at a fundraising event, and he refused to attend unless I joined him. You did most of the work, he said. You were the patient. You were the person who prevented the patient from giving up. The private ward looked smaller than I remembered. The folding bed was gone. The walls had been repainted. Another family occupied the room where I had spent 6 months reading financial reports to a man whose soul stood beside me. I paused in the corridor. Julian noticed immediately. Too much? No. But memories filled the space anyway. Mangoes on the windowsill, Jazz playing softly beside the machines, his invisible soul complaining that I had chosen the wrong business newspaper. The night I confessed everything about my childhood because I believed the only person listening could never respond. Julian rested his hand against my back. You know what I remember most clearly? The pudding? That is second. He looked through the glass panel in the door. I remember you saying that taking care of me was easier than living with your family. I lowered my eyes. I hated that sentence. Why? Because you sounded grateful for a hospital room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he continued, I promised myself that if I woke up, you would never again believe cruelty was normal simply because it was familiar. You also promised to destroy Vanessa's reputation. I was emotional. You threatened several people. I had been separated from my body. My judgment was temporarily dramatic. I laughed. He smiled, but his voice remained serious. Your parents taught you to survive on whatever they left behind. I wanted you to learn that choosing yourself was not selfish. I'm still learning. So am I. That was the truth of our life after the dramatic ending people had read about online. Neither of us became perfect. Julian still tried to hide pain when he overworked. I still apologized for things that required no apology. Sometimes I woke from dreams in which he had forgotten everything, and Vanessa stood beside his bed wearing my life like it belonged to her. On those nights, Julian never told me the fear was irrational. He simply stayed awake until I believed where I was. My ability never disappeared. I still saw souls. Some were frightened, some were angry. Some only wanted someone to know they had not vanished completely. But I no longer thought of my gift as the curse my parents had described. It had led me into Julian's hospital room. It had allowed him to speak when the world believed he was silent. And it had given me proof that being unseen by one family did not mean I would remain unseen forever. My parents eventually stopped trying to contact us. Vanessa moved to another city and rebuilt her public image under a different name. I heard she still told people the Ashfords had misunderstood her. Perhaps she even believed it. I no longer cared. The greatest revenge was not watching them suffer. It was reaching a point where their choices no longer shaped mine. One evening, Julian and I sat on the terrace while the Chicago skyline glowed beyond the garden. He placed a bowl between us. Mango pudding. Again. Do wealthy families eat anything else? I asked. This wealthy family has traditions. You invented them. Yes, which makes me the authority. He handed me a spoon. I took it. For most of my life, I had been taught to eat what remained after everyone else was satisfied. Now, someone always made sure there was enough for both of us. The family that treated me like a burden watched me become someone they could never control again. They had taught me to shrink, obey, and accept scraps as love. But in a quiet hospital room filled with jazz, financial news, and the scent of mangoes, a soul listened to every truth I had never been allowed to say. And when Julian returned to his body, he remembered all of it. He did not rescue me. He simply opened the door. I was the one who finally walked out. Do you think Vanessa and Elena's parents received the ending they deserved? Or should the consequences have been even harsher? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe for more emotional stories about betrayal, revenge, hidden truths, and unexpected love.